Welcome. Today we look back at one of the most defining events in human history, World War II. This was a conflict that reshaped nations, transformed societies, and changed the role of the United States in the world forever. What follows is not a story of heroes and villains alone, but a record of decisions, sacrifices, and consequences that continue to shape our present. This is the story of World War II. World War II from the inside. How America learned to fight a global war. When the United States entered World War II, it did not enter as a fully prepared global fighting machine. Despite its industrial strength, America lacked recent experience in large-scale modern warfare. The U.S. military had not fought a major conflict since World War I, and much of its doctrine, leadership structure, and equipment reflected outdated assumptions. World War II would force the United States to learn how to fight on an unprecedented scale across multiple continents against enemies with very different strategies and cultures. In 1941, the U.S. Army was relatively small compared to the massive forces already fighting in Europe and Asia. Training was uneven, equipment shortages were common, and coordination between branches was still developing. The Navy and Army Air Forces were expanding rapidly, but doctrine was still being tested. American leaders understood that industrial power alone would not guarantee victory. The war would demand experience, adaptation, and the ability to fight as a unified force. The challenge facing the United States was unique. Unlike most nations involved in the war, America had to fight on two major fronts simultaneously. In Europe, the primary enemy was Nazi Germany, a technologically advanced military power, with experienced officers and highly disciplined troops. In the Pacific, the United States faced Imperial Japan, whose forces fought with extreme determination and emphasized sacrifice over surrender. These two theaters required completely different approaches, tactics, and mindsets. Early encounters exposed American weaknesses. In North Africa, U.S. forces suffered painful defeats against German troops, who exploited poor coordination and inexperienced leadership. In the Pacific, Japanese forces initially outmaneuvered and outfought American units. These setbacks were shocking, but they became powerful lessons. American commanders began identifying failures honestly, replacing ineffective leaders, and revising tactics based on battlefield realities rather than theory. One of the most important changes was the development of joint operations. World War II forced the U.S. Army, Navy, Air Forces, and Marines to work together in ways never seen before. Amphibious landings required precise coordination between ships, aircraft, and ground troops. Strategic bombing campaigns depended on intelligence, logistics, and fighter protection. Success increasingly depended on how well different branches could integrate their efforts. Training evolved rapidly. Soldiers and officers learned from combat reports and first-hand experience. New units benefited from the hard lessons paid for by earlier ones. Leadership emphasized flexibility, initiative, and decentralized decision-making. Junior officers and non-commissioned officers were given greater responsibility, recognizing that battlefield conditions often demanded immediate action without guidance from higher command. Industrial power amplified these improvements. As American factories reached full wartime production, equipment shortages eased. Units received better weapons, vehicles, communications gear, and medical support. Logistical systems improved, allowing American forces to sustain operations far from home. This combination of learning, production, and organization gradually transformed the U.S. military. World War II became a process of adaptation. The United States did not win simply because it was strong. It won because it learned faster than its enemies. Each defeat carried lessons, each victory refined methods. Over time, American forces became more effective, more coordinated, and more confident in their ability to fight and win. This transformation did not happen overnight. It was built through trial, error, and sacrifice. The story of World War II for the United States is not only a story of battles and victories, but of growth under pressure. It is the story of a nation that entered the war untested and emerged as a global military power, shaped by the hard realities of modern combat. Early failures. What America got wrong. In the first years of the war, when the United States entered World War II, confidence ran ahead of experience. American industry was powerful, manpower was abundant, and national morale surged after Pearl Harbor. Yet on the battlefield, these strengths did not immediately translate into success. The first years of the war exposed serious weaknesses in American planning, leadership, and combat readiness. These early failures were painful, costly, and necessary lessons in how not to fight a modern war. One of the most significant problems was inexperience. Many American units entered combat without having faced a professional enemy. Training emphasized discipline and basic skills, but it could not fully prepare soldiers for the chaos of real combat. Commanders who had never led troops under fire struggled to adapt. Orders were sometimes rigid, slow, or disconnected from battlefield realities. German and Japanese forces, by contrast, had years of combat experience and exploited American mistakes quickly. Leadership failures were most visible in early ground campaigns. In North Africa, American forces encountered seasoned German units commanded by experienced officers. Poor coordination between infantry, armor, and artillery left U.S. units vulnerable. Communications broke down under pressure. Units advanced without proper reconnaissance and were caught in well-prepared enemy positions. The defeat at Kasserine Pass in early 1943 became a symbol of these shortcomings. American troops were outmaneuvered and forced into retreat, suffering heavy losses in men and equipment. Equipment and doctrine also lagged behind reality. Early American tanks were often outgunned and under-armored compared to German models. Anti-tank tactics were insufficient, and coordination between armor and infantry was inconsistent. In the air, American pilots initially lacked experience against veteran enemy flyers. Losses were high until tactics improved and escort fighters became more effective. In the Pacific, early failures took a different form. Japanese forces achieved rapid victories through speed, surprise, and aggressive tactics. American and Allied positions in the Philippines, Wake Island, and Guam were overwhelmed. Defensive planning had underestimated Japanese capabilities and resolve. Supply shortages, outdated equipment, and lack of air and naval support doomed many early defenses. The fall of Bataan and the suffering of American prisoners during the Bataan Death March shocked the nation and exposed the cost of unpreparedness. Coordination between branches was another major weakness. Early operations often suffered from poor cooperation between the Army, Navy, and Air Forces. Rivalries and unclear command structures slowed decision-making. Amphibious operations revealed gaps in planning and execution. It became clear that fighting a global war required unified command and integrated operations. not isolated efforts. Despite these failures, the American response was decisive. The U.S. military proved willing to learn. Ineffective commanders were replaced. Training programs were revised based on combat experience. Doctrine evolved to emphasize flexibility, combined arms, and initiative at lower levels. Intelligence analysis improved, and lessons from defeats were studied carefully rather than ignored. Industrial strength supported these changes. As production increased, units received better weapons, vehicles, communications equipment. Learning under fire. How American forces adapted and improved. The early failures of American forces in World War II forced a rapid and often brutal process of learning. Unlike some armies that clung rigidly to tradition, the United States military proved capable of adaptation under pressure. This ability to analyze mistakes, replace ineffective leadership, and revise doctrine became one of the most important reasons for eventual Allied victory. The transformation did not happen overnight. It was built through experience gained in combat, often at great cost. One of the first changes involved leadership. Commanders who failed to perform under fire were relieved, sometimes quickly and publicly. This was not done lightly, but necessity demanded results. Officers who demonstrated flexibility, decisiveness, and an understanding of modern warfare were promoted. Leaders such as Dwight D. Eisenhower, Omar Bradley, and George S. Patton emerged as central figures, each with different styles, but a shared emphasis on coordination, discipline, and momentum. At lower levels, junior officers and non-commissioned officers were given greater authority to make decisions when communication with higher command broke down. Training methods also evolved. Early in the war, training had been standardized but disconnected from battlefield realities. As combat reports returned from Europe and the Pacific, training programs were rewritten. Soldiers practiced combined arms operations, learning how infantry, tanks, artillery, and air support worked together. Live fire exercises became more common. Emphasis shifted toward realism, initiative, and problem-solving, rather than rote drill alone. Equipment improved alongside tactics. American industry responded to feedback from the front with remarkable speed. Tanks were upgraded, anti-tank weapons improved, and communications equipment became more reliable. Aircraft designs evolved rapidly, incorporating lessons from air combat. Medical equipment and evacuation procedures were refined, reducing fatalities among the wounded. These improvements did not eliminate casualties, but they increased survivability and combat effectiveness. Coordination between branches became a priority. The demands of amphibious warfare in North Africa, Italy, and the Pacific made joint operations unavoidable. The Army, Navy, Air Forces, and Marines learned to plan together, share intelligence, and support one another. Amphibious landings improved through experience, with better naval gunfire support, air cover, and logistics. Strategic bombing campaigns became more effective as escort fighters extended their range and air superiority was established. Logistics emerged as a decisive advantage. The United States developed the ability to supply large forces across vast distances, whether across the Atlantic or deep into the Pacific. Fuel, ammunition, food, and medical supplies flowed in quantities unmatched by any other nation. This logistical strength allowed American forces to sustain long campaigns without the shortages that plagued their enemies. It also enabled flexibility, allowing commanders to exploit opportunities quickly. Perhaps most importantly, American forces developed confidence. Early defeats had shattered illusions, but they also removed complacency. Soldiers and officers learned what worked and what did not. Experience bred competence. Units that survived early campaigns became hardened veterans capable of sustained combat. New units benefited from the lessons learned by those who came before them. Adaptation extended beyond the battlefield. Intelligence gathering improved, including code breaking, reconnaissance, and analysis. Understanding enemy tactics and intentions, turning the tide. From defense to relentless offense. By 1943, the United States had completed its painful transition from an untested force to a confident, increasingly effective military power. The early years of defense and reaction were ending. American strategy now shifted toward sustained, coordinated offensives designed to exhaust and destroy Axis capabilities on every front. This change was not sudden, but it was decisive. The United States no longer fought simply to survive. It fought to win. In Europe, this shift became visible through a series of increasingly ambitious operations. After securing North Africa, American forces joined British units in the invasion of Italy. Although the Italian campaign proved slow and costly, it forced Germany to commit valuable troops and resources to a secondary front. Every German division fighting in Italy was one less available to defend France or resist the Soviet advance in the east. The campaign also gave American forces further experience in amphibious landings, mountain warfare, and coordination with Allied partners. At the same time, the air war over Europe intensified dramatically. American bombers struck deep into German territory on a near-daily basis. Factories, rail networks, oil facilities, and aircraft plants became primary targets. While losses among bomber crews remained high, the gradual achievement of air superiority changed the balance of power. German industry struggled to recover from repeated attacks, and shortages of fuel and aircraft increasingly limited German operations. Control of the air became a prerequisite for the major ground offensives that followed. In the Atlantic, the tide also turned. By mid-1943, improved convoy systems, radar, sonar, and escort carriers broke the German U-boat threat. American and Allied shipping losses dropped sharply, while German submarine losses soared. Securing the Atlantic sea lanes allowed the United States to move troops, vehicles, and supplies to Europe in enormous numbers. This logistical dominance made large-scale offensives possible and ensured that setbacks could be absorbed without strategic collapse. In the Pacific, the transition to offense took the form of island-hopping campaigns. American forces targeted strategically important islands while bypassing heavily defended positions that could be isolated and neutralized. Victories at Guadalcanal, the Gilbert Islands, and later the Marshall Islands demonstrated that Japanese expansion had been halted. The initiative now belonged to the United States. Each captured island brought American air power closer to Japan and tightened the noose around Japanese supply lines. American industry played a central role in this transformation. Shipyards launched aircraft carriers, destroyers, and transports at an unprecedented pace. Aircraft production soared, providing fighters, bombers, and transport planes in numbers the Axis could not match. Ground forces received improved weapons, vehicles, and communications equipment. This material advantage did not eliminate the need for courage or skill, but it allowed American forces to replace losses and maintain pressure continuously. Equally important was the refinement of command and coordination. Large-scale operations required precise timing between land, sea, and air forces. Joint planning improved steadily. Lessons learned in earlier campaigns were applied to new operations. Mistakes still occurred, but they were increasingly corrected quickly. The United States developed the ability to conduct simultaneous offensives across multiple theaters, stretching Axis defenses to the breaking point. By late 1943 and early 1944, the strategic initiative had clearly shifted. Axis forces were no longer dictating the pace or location of battles. They were reacting to Allied moves, the human cost of relentless offense, casualties, morale, and endurance. As American forces shifted from defense to sustained offensive operations, the human cost of World War II increased sharply. Victory was no longer measured only in territory gained or enemy units destroyed, but in the endurance of the men carrying out these operations. Relentless pressure on the Axis required constant movement, repeated assaults, and prolonged exposure to danger. For American soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines, the war became a test of physical and psychological limits. Casualties mounted steadily. Large-scale offensives meant frequent contact with the enemy, and even successful operations carried heavy losses. In Europe, American troops fought through fortified towns, forests, and river crossings under intense artillery and small arms fire. In the Pacific, assaults on heavily defended islands resulted in brutal close-range combat. Every advance brought wounded and dead. Replacement soldiers arrived regularly, often inexperienced and unprepared for the reality of combat, forcing veteran units to absorb losses while continuing to fight. Morale became a critical concern. Early enthusiasm faded as the war dragged on. Soldiers faced exhaustion, fear, and the constant loss of friends. Long periods at the front with limited rest wore down even the most disciplined units. Commanders recognized that morale was as important as ammunition. Units that lost cohesion or confidence became vulnerable. Maintaining morale required leadership, rest rotations when possible, mail from home, and a belief that sacrifices were contributing to eventual victory. Combat stress accumulated over time. Soldiers who had survived multiple battles showed signs of strain. Irritability, emotional numbness, difficulty sleeping, and impaired judgment became common. What was often called battle fatigue was increasingly recognized as a consequence of prolonged exposure to danger. Although understanding was limited by modern standards, military leaders gradually acknowledged that no soldier could endure constant combat indefinitely without effects. Medical and evacuation systems were pushed to their limits. Advances in battlefield medicine saved many lives, but treatment often occurred under fire or in difficult conditions. Medics and corpsmen faced extreme danger as they moved to aid the wounded. Hospitals near the front filled quickly, and evacuation chains stretched across continents. Survival rates improved compared to earlier wars, but many wounded lived with permanent injuries. Despite these hardships, American forces continued to advance. Endurance became a defining characteristic. Soldiers learned to operate while tired, hungry, and afraid. Small routines helped maintain stability. Cleaning weapons, checking equipment, sharing food, and writing letters provided brief moments of normalcy. Camaraderie remained a powerful force. Men fought not only for strategic objectives, but for each other. The scale of the war meant that loss became widespread. Almost every unit experienced casualties. Memorial services were brief and often interrupted by the demands of combat. Grief was carried forward rather than resolved. veterans later recalled that the constant presence of death reshaped how they viewed life itself. Relentless offense achieved its purpose. Axis forces were steadily weakened, driven back, and ultimately defeated. But this success came at a profound human cost. The experience left deep marks on those who fought, shaping their memories, identities, and futures. The home front. How American society sustained a global war. While American soldiers fought across Europe and the Pacific, the war was also being fought at home. Victory in World War II depended not only on battles overseas, but on the ability of American society to sustain a conflict that demanded total mobilization. The home front became an essential part of the war effort, transforming daily life and redefining the relationship between civilians and the military. After Pearl Harbor, the United States shifted rapidly to a wartime economy. Factories that once produced cars, appliances, and consumer goods were converted to manufacture tanks, aircraft, ships, weapons, and ammunition. Automobile plants built bombers and armored vehicles. Shipyards launched vessels at unprecedented speed. American industrial output surpassed that of all Axis powers combined. This production advantage became one of the decisive factors of the war. Millions of civilians entered war-related industries. Women filled roles previously closed to them, working as welders, machinists, engineers, and assembly line workers. The image of Rosie the Riveter symbolized this shift. But behind the image was a massive social transformation. Women proved essential to maintaining production, while millions of men served overseas. Minority workers also migrated in large numbers to industrial centers, reshaping the demographic landscape of American cities. The federal government played a central role in coordinating the war effort. Agencies regulated production, controlled prices, and managed rationing. Food, gasoline, rubber, and other essential materials were rationed to ensure fair distribution and military priority. Civilians adjusted to shortages, recycled materials, and accepted limitations as part of their contribution to the war. Victory gardens appeared across the country, supplying food and boosting morale. Public morale was carefully managed. Newsreels, radio broadcasts, posters, and newspapers emphasized unity, sacrifice, and purpose. War bond drives encouraged citizens to invest financially in the conflict. Hollywood contributed by producing films that supported the war effort, celebrated service members, and reinforced national resolve. At the same time, censorship limited information that could aid the enemy or undermine morale. Families bore heavy emotional burdens. Letters became lifelines between the front and home. Delays or silence caused anxiety and fear. Casualty notifications arrived by telegram, bringing sudden loss into ordinary households. Communities shared grief collectively, supporting families of the fallen while continuing daily life under the shadow of war. The home front was not without tension. Labor disputes, racial discrimination, and social inequality persisted despite calls for unity. The internment of Japanese Americans represented one of the darkest chapters of the wartime home front, reflecting fear and prejudice rather than military necessity. These contradictions revealed that even in a just cause, democratic societies struggled to uphold their ideals under pressure. Despite challenges, the American home front sustained the war effort with remarkable consistency. Industrial output remained high, public support endured, and logistical systems delivered vast resources to distant battlefields. Soldiers overseas depended on this support, knowing that behind them stood an entire society committed to their survival and success. World War II blurred the line between civilian and soldier. The home front became an extension of the battlefield, bound by shared sacrifice and responsibility. Without the factories, farms, families, and communities at home, American forces could not have maintained relentless pressure abroad. The war was won not only by those who fought, but by those who sustained the fight from thousands of miles away. Victory, occupation, and the immediate aftermath of war. By 1945, the relentless pressure applied by Allied forces across every front had brought the Axis powers to collapse. In Europe, American, British, and Allied armies pushed deep into Germany as Soviet forces advanced from the east. Cities lay in ruins, transportation networks were shattered, and German command structures disintegrated. For American soldiers who had fought from North Africa through France and into Germany, victory came not in a single dramatic moment, but through exhaustion, confusion, and the quiet realization that the enemy could no longer resist. Germany's surrender in May 1945 ended the war in Europe, but it did not immediately end the responsibilities of American forces. U.S. troops transitioned from combat to occupation almost overnight. Their mission changed from defeating an enemy to controlling territory, maintaining order, and preventing further violence. This transition was psychologically difficult for many soldiers. Men trained to fight now had to show restraint, discipline, and patience in a defeated nation. American occupation forces were tasked with disarming German troops, securing infrastructure, and administering devastated regions. Millions of displaced civilians wandered across Europe, including former prisoners of war, forced laborers, and concentration camp survivors. American soldiers encountered humanitarian crises on an immense scale. Food shortages, homelessness, and disease were widespread. Providing stability became as important as maintaining security. One of the most profound experiences for American troops was the liberation of concentration camps. Soldiers who entered camps such as Dachau and Buchenwald were confronted with evidence of mass murder and systematic cruelty. Emaciated survivors, mass graves, and abandoned facilities revealed the full scope of Nazi crimes. Many soldiers later described these moments as among the most shocking of their lives. The discoveries reinforced the moral stakes of the war and the necessity of ensuring that such crimes could never be denied or repeated. In the Pacific, the war continued even after victory in Europe. American forces prepared for what many feared would be the bloodiest phase of the conflict, an invasion of Japan. Battles like Iwo Jima and Okinawa had demonstrated the extreme cost of confronting Japanese defenses. As preparations continued, American forces maintained pressure through bombing campaigns and naval blockades. Japan's surrender in August 1945 ended World War II globally. As in Europe, American forces assumed occupation duties, this time in Japan. Under the leadership of General Douglas MacArthur, the occupation focused on demilitarization, political reform, and reconstruction. Japanese military forces were disbanded, weapons were destroyed, and a new constitution was introduced. American troops enforced order while avoiding retaliation or abuse, emphasizing stability over punishment. For many American service legacy, what World War II changed forever. World War II ended in 1945, but its consequences reshaped the world in ways that are still felt today. For the United States, the war marked a turning point unlike any in its history. A nation that had once avoided permanent involvement in global affairs emerged as a central power with worldwide responsibilities. This transformation was not the result of ambition alone, but of necessity forged by total war. The conflict permanently changed how wars were fought. World War II demonstrated that modern warfare depended on coordination between land, sea, air, industry, science, and society itself. No single battle or weapon decided the outcome. Victory came through sustained pressure, logistical dominance, and the ability to adapt faster than the enemy. The United States emerged from the war with a military that had learned how to operate on a global scale, setting the foundation for modern joint warfare. The war also transformed international politics. In its aftermath, the United States played a leading role in rebuilding former enemies and allies alike. The Marshall Plan helped restore Western Europe's economies, reducing instability and preventing the collapse that had followed World War I. In Japan, American-led occupation and reform reshaped a former adversary into a democratic ally. These decisions reflected lessons learned from earlier failures to secure lasting peace. World War II led to the creation of new global institutions designed to prevent another catastrophe. The United Nations, international financial systems, and collective security arrangements emerged from the recognition that isolation and rivalry had failed. While these systems were imperfect, they represented an attempt to replace unchecked conflict with cooperation and diplomacy. For American society, the war left deep marks. Millions of veterans returned home carrying memories of combat, loss, and survival. Their experiences shaped post-war culture, politics, and values. Education expanded, economic opportunity grew, and the middle class broadened, influenced in part by policies created to support returning soldiers. At the same time, the war exposed contradictions within American society, including racial inequality and civil liberties violations, reminding future generations that victory did not erase injustice. The moral legacy of World War II remains complex. The war revealed the depths of human cruelty through genocide and mass destruction, while also demonstrating the capacity for sacrifice, resilience, and cooperation. The use of strategic bombing and atomic weapons ended the war, but raised questions that continue to be debated. World War II made clear that modern conflicts carry consequences far beyond the battlefield. For the individuals who fought, the war never truly ended. Veterans carried its impact throughout their lives, shaping how they viewed authority, responsibility, and peace. Many spoke little of their experiences, but their actions defined the outcome of the conflict. Ordinary people, placed in extraordinary circumstances, determined the course of history. Today, World War II stands as both a warning and a lesson. It warns of the cost of unchecked aggression, political failure, and dehumanization. It teaches the importance of preparation, unity, and adaptability in times of crisis. For the United States, the war defined its role in the modern world and the responsibilities that come with power. As generations pass and living memory fades, the responsibility to remember grows stronger. World War II was not inevitable, and its lessons remain relevant. The world that emerged after World War II reshaped the world we live in today. Its victories, losses, and lessons remind us of the cost of global conflict and the value of cooperation. By remembering this history, we honor those who lived through it and better understand the world they left behind. Thank you for watching, and thank you for remembering.